topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Elise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program. Thanks for tuning in again this week. Great to have you. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. If we've not met yet and you don't know me, I'm a management consultant, organizational logotherapist, speaker, and author. My team and I help companies to articulate their purpose, develop inspirational leaders, and build cultures activated by meaning and purpose. Doing so turns those companies from a flatline EKG to a vibrant workplace where people are motivated to perform at their best while growing into their fuller potential. You can learn more about us and how we can work together at elisecortez.com. Also, if you like the content and the guests I bring on the show, you may be interested in my next book due out in March 2023. It's called The Great Revitalization, How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. You can pre-order your copy at bookshop.org, barnesandnoble.com, or Amazon. Now let's get into this week's program. My guests are the co-authors of Decisions Over Decimals, Striking the Balance Between Intuition and Information. We have with us today Paul Magnoni, head of global strategic alliances at Google, where he is developing a growing ecosystem of partners that will unlock the next generation of business value via the cloud and related technologies. And we also have Christopher Frank, a 27-year seasoned market research leader who has spent the last 14 years at American Express. There he is focused on transforming the speed, relevancy, and impact of insights to influence marketing strategy. We'll be talking about the 3 pillars anchored in their book to build what they call quantitative intuition. Paul and Christopher, welcome to Working on Purpose.
Thank you so much for having us.
It's wonderful. I always really love having authors on my show. And look at this beautiful thing you brought into the world. This is actually, I am here to tell you, gentlemen, this is harder than birth, okay? Actual childbirth. So hats off. We're going to just start there, okay? This is where the show's going. Since I know you because I read your beautiful book, but my guests and viewers don't. So let's open with a background on each of you just briefly. And then, of course, I got to hear how in the world this book came to be. So who's going first?
Sure. So this is Paul. Hello, everyone. Chris and I actually went to college together, which is part of the story of how the book came about. But started in engineering school, spent a couple of decades at IBM, then startups, then Deloitte, and now Google. Through that, I've seen wave after wave of new technology and, internet, cloud computing, and so forth. So I tend to surf the waves of the next new thing, which is pretty great. But you need to get your bearings, and that's part of what I infused into the book. Chris?
Wonderful.
Yeah, and so Paul and I started in an engineering science school in New Jersey, and then I went off to work. I've been fortunate to work in 2 iconic brands. I worked at Microsoft for 10 years, so always in a data scientist, analytic role, market research, and for the last 14 years, as you mentioned, at American Express. Along with that, I also worked in consulting and founded 2 startups. And the common theme for all that was not only, availability of information and data, but, how do we, drive better strategy? How do we, throughout, regardless of the size of firm, entity, organization, team, local or global, everyone always said, help make me smarter with the data. You're the data guy. Give me the answer. And that's really where this journey started.
Mm. You know, gentlemen, that's one of the things that I often ponder on. I've been hosting this radio show for 8 years, and this is, I think, your episode 414. Why do I keep doing it? Because you make me smarter. And your book absolutely made me smarter. So I want to situate this for our listeners and viewers. Who doesn't want this on an individual level for themselves, their teams, their companies? You say, what distinguishes a person who makes smart, confident, data-driven decisions? It is not exceptional analytical skills. Instead, successful decision makers balance data, experience, and intuition. That last one got me. They quickly sort through information, apply judgment, and are fierce interrogators of data to cultivate sharp insights. That sounds good to me. Teach us all how to do that.
Well,
So, one thing I would say is, and we talk about this extensively in the book, is you don't need to go to math camp to make better decisions.
Good.
You don't need to be a math savant in order to work with data and information. And let's start out the discussion here. When we talk about data, we're talking about not just spreadsheets. We're talking about all the information we get to consume these days. So it could be qualitative, it could be quantitative, it could be reports, it could just be discussions with your colleagues. And I think that's important to understand. So, the smartest person, first of all, casts a wide net of that information. And then two, it's not all about the analysis and the technical tools. And Paul, I know you have a perspective on that because I come at from the data analytics side. Paul comes from a different perspective.
yeah, I'd have to say I'm a systems thinker and deal maker at heart. So that engineering background, but then how do you apply it to solve a problem? And in those moments when you're solving a problem in the midst of a deal, logic goes out the window. People are grasping at straws. We talk about what is a decision, and a decision is fundamentally change, and people are terrified of change. What happens in that moment of change? You retreat to what you're comfortable with. Some people go to spreadsheets and then more spreadsheets, and then they want your spreadsheets, and then they want somebody else's spreadsheets, and there's never enough data. And other people say, I don't have time for that. I have good instincts. And there lies the problem, because those are two different camps, and you've now sub-optimized how to make a decision rather than bringing all of that together and saying, let's balance both sides of that and learn as we go from side to side and really zero in on a good decision. I do want to point out that there is a third leg to the stool here, and his name is Oded Netzer. Professor Netzer is, when we first met him, he was but a professor at Columbia who had us guest lecture, and now he is the vice dean of research at Columbia Business School. And it's unfortunate that he can't be with us today, but what he often points out is that, amongst the three of us, you have data scientists, three of us, two data scientists, two engineers by training, and we see this over and over, regardless of you come at it from his statistical point of view. He's a brilliant statistician, and how he sees the problem is, again, a little different than how I see it or how Chris sees it. But we all come to that same recognition that people don't have a good toolkit for themselves to get through to that decision. And that's how we combined all of these thoughts into quantitative intuition.
And that's why I wanted to have you on the show, Paul, because I really think you've made something very scary and atrocious quite accessible for us. And that's really, really very exhilarating and very refreshing. So if we go to the first area here, which I mentioned, about intuition, I just find how you talk about intuition quite compelling as well. How do you situate intuition for us?
Yeah, so we've been teaching this class, quantitative intuition is a method or the framework. We've been teaching at Columbia for 7 years, and we teach both in the executive MBA in the business school and also a corporate MBA, corporate education program. And one of the questions we get all the time is, can you teach intuition?
Mm.
And when you step back and think about what is intuition, intuition is a collection of experiences over time And you start to understand, and you've seen this movie before, and there's certain parameters, and there's something we call it's a theory of learning, and it's not our model. We discuss it in the book, but you should think about learning as two dimensions, or intuition. And it's really about competency, which is the y-axis, and uh, God, it's escaping me, Paul. It's competence and
And um,
consciousness.
consciousness. There you
So
go.
I'm sorry, there are two C's. And so if you think about consciousness and competence, think about when you're first learning to drive. What is that like? Your both hands are on the wheel, normally white knuckles. You are in, you are incompetent, and you're conscious of that.
Mhm.
So you basically know what you don't know. And as you practice more, as you drive more, you eventually get to the point where you are so competent, you just do things without thinking. You're unconscious of it. How often have you, maybe pulled into your driveway, and reached your home, and you're like, I didn't even think about the journey. Not that we're recommending that, but that is a bit of what intuition is. You do things so often, you've seen things so often, and in work, and especially in your profession, over time, you build that level of being so competent, and you can tap into that experience, and you just know something, you feel something. That is an intuition.
And just to add to that, the question of can you teach intuition? Let's not even debate that. But what I guarantee you that we can do is help you start to listen to that inner voice, because there is a level of intuition. And as I said before, when people who are not, who do not feel intuitive retreat to the numbers, they're actually shutting off their own voice in their head saying, do you really want to go in that direction?
Mhm.
Are you really not listening to the matter at hand? So just the ability to open yourself up to that unconscious competence that you have later on in life, because you're seeing patterns and you've seen that pattern. So why do you shut that off? Opening up that conversation is critical.
Mm. I love that, of course. And I want to also, for our listeners and viewers, situate what you did so beautifully in the book here, to go on and add another layer here. You say intuition can be further defined with reference to three distinct features. It is a subconscious process. It involves parallel thinking, that is holistic rather than sequential or analytical thinking, and it involves your gut as well as your brain. I think that's important, that listeners and viewers understand that holistic nature of what you've been describing.
Yeah, and so we're all operating with incomplete information. We live in a world of ambiguity, and yet we seek precision.
Right.
Right. So I have to applaud um, the teachers in my children's school. So I have a 13-year-old and an 11-year-old. And they both in the past year have come home, and I see the math problems in particular. And they're asked for approximation, which blew their little minds,
Mm-hmm.
because we're all taught, and certainly our generation was taught, precision.
Right.
The fact is, why does precision matter if intuition, if approximation, being right enough than precisely wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being right
Mm-hmm.
gets you to the next step of the conversation. And this is what's happening in the business world, where there's an insatiable appetite for ever more data, which sends you down the wrong rabbit hole.
Right.
Pull back and take the blinders off and look holistically across what's happening. So you're actually solving the problem, and recognize that being approximately right is better than being precisely wrong.
Which you absolutely address in the book beautifully. Thank you very much. Before we hit our first break, I want to now dive into your first pillar of quantitative intuition, which is precise questioning. I love the idea of asking a set of really great questions, and you do this beautifully in the book. Tell us a little bit about precise questioning, please.
Yeah, the smartest person in the room is not the person with the answer. And kind of building on what Paul just said about education, I think for most of us that have gone through the education system, it's grounded in what is the answer? Do you have the right answer?
Mm-hmm.
And when you start your career and you start working professionally, you think you have to have that right answer in the room. And the most effective, smartest person in the room is the one that asks questions. And the reason is, it shows that they are engaged, that they are thinking about the problem, that they are trying to come at it from all perspectives, and they're really trying to understand and frame it. And the ability to ask smart, precise questions is a real skill. And that is something that we talk a great deal in the book. And we dedicate several chapters to it, is, what is the science of asking precise questions? And we actually share a couple of specific questions, we think what we call our powerful questions. And one of the most powerful questions we talk about is, what surprised you? It's a simple 3-word question. It's very deceptive. But if you ask that question in a work setting or even in a personal setting, tell me about what surprised you. It gives permission for that person to engage differently. It gives permission for them to say, you know what, I didn't understand this. It creates a safe learning environment. Psychologically, safety is something I know that we talk a lot about, and wanting to create that kind of environment in our organizations. And when you ask a question, such as what surprised you, or any question that is open-ended, you're opening up that dialogue. Let's engage, let's talk, let's share, and let's figure out how to move forward versus, do you know the answer?
Mm-hmm. Which is closed.
Right.
Wonderful way to take us into our first break. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We've been on the air with Paul Magnone and Christopher Frank. They are co-authors of Decisions Over Decimals, Striking the Balance Between Intuition and Information. We've been talking about the first pillar of their model, precision questioning. After the break, we're going to get into the second pillar, which is contextual analysis, and start into the third, synthesis. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us, and welcome back to Working on Purpose. Before we get back to the program, I do want to invite you to check out the first book that I wrote. It's called Purpose Ignited, and I really wrote it to awaken readers to their passion and their purpose and start them down the path of becoming an inspirational leader to be able to enliven that workplace and be able to serve all stakeholders. I use it as the basis of my leadership programs as well. If you're now just joining the program, my two guests are the co-authors of Decisions Over Decimals, Striking the Balance Between Intuition and Information. We have Paul Magnone, who is head of Global Strategic Alliances at Global, where he is developing a growing ecosystem of partners that will unlock the next generation of business value via the cloud and related technologies. We also have Christopher Frank, a seasoned market researcher leader at American Express, where he is focused on transforming the speed, relevancy, and impact of insights to influence marketing strategy. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. So we covered a bit about precision questioning. There's so much more we could have said about that. And I don't know if you did want to talk about, I wish I knew. I don't know, you mentioned that, Paul, but I do for this segment want to also focus on contextual analysis. Did you want to talk about I wish I knew first?
Yeah, let me just touch upon that briefly. So one of the most powerful things to do to set up the structure for the interrogation that you're doing is to use a technique that we refer to as I wish I knew. And so you ask that question again, it's an open-ended question as we discussed before. But here's where it strikes me. We have so many people that look to Silicon Valley and say, how does Elon Musk focus on first principles? That's awesome. You know what? Let's focus on first principles. And then they stare at the screen because they don't know what to do. Like, how do you get to that essential question? Well, here's a technique. Ask the constituents, ask the stakeholders, what is it that you wish you knew? And when you follow that chain and ask why a few times, why is that important? Why is that important? And you start to gather that up and coalesce all of that, you've got your first principle. Very simple techniques, and really it is about having the courage to be that interrogator, to ask the question and not accept the status quo.
Wonderful, Paul. Thank you very much. That's a wonderful contribution to what we were talking about in the first segment. So now here we are on the second pillar of quantitative intuition, which is contextual analysis. Who wants to tell us a little bit about that first before we dive deeper into it?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick us off, and then Paul could build on. So, context is king. I mean, there's, let me just, whenever you see a data point, always ask for context. And when we talk about context, let's kind of double click on what we mean by that. You look at a data point in absolute, you look at it over time, and you look at it relative to some benchmark, some competitor. There's a great case study in the book that we talk about the incredible sales of snow shovels in Rome, and a number of years ago. And they were two Canadian producers of snow shovels. They woke up one day, they saw, their Rome sales grew like 6%, and they were just surprised and delighted, and they were celebrating, and they're like, great, I'm not sure what's going on in Rome. They had an unexpected snowstorm, but they were celebrating their sales until they learned that their lead competitor had a 9% increase in sales. So when we talk about context, and whenever someone gives you a number, triangulating a number, along those 3 points is absolutely essential. And again, you don't need to go to math camp, just simply saying, how did that number look a quarter ago, a year ago, 2 years ago? How is that relative to our competitor or our other product? So that is not math camp. That is a way you could become a fierce interrogator and put data in context without ever having to do a pivot table or run any kind of complex model.
And just recognize the situation that Chris described, which is an unusual circumstance. There was a freak snowstorm. So are you going to pivot your business and now optimize for selling snow shovels in Rome because you believe every week there will be a freak snowstorm? You change your business strategy because of an anomaly, or you take advantage of it and it's great, but you don't have to change your business strategy. And yet what we see in the corporate world is knee-jerk reactions over and over. And it's like living inside of a pinball machine, isn't it? Well, I mean, we're better than this. And this is part of what's frustrating and why we wanted to get this down into a book. We are better than this. Regardless of what school you went to, people are thoughtful and they're not thinking.
Yes, and this is where you really stepped into, and I captured certainly in my notes, the power of approximation, as you mentioned in the first segment here, of starting to look at, does this sort of seem right? Does it seem like it's kind of right or in the right ballpark kind of thing? And I really found that very useful, especially since, we do have access to so much information. But I mean, I've seen ridiculous numbers come out and people just accept and nod their head. Looking at that, it's completely ridiculous. And even I, as someone who doesn't even have access to data that where it came from, could see that it's way out of line.
Yeah, it's if you think back to pretty much any bubble whatsoever,
Right.
there's usually somebody who is so far enamored by the bubble itself that I remember watching Squawk Box in the morning, and we love Squawk Box. We don't want letters, but talking about, well, they don't have an alpha product out yet, but we believe in 10 years their future multiple stop right there.
Right.
But somehow you want everybody to invest in something that's unproven because you're so excited. And we're back to the tulip craze from centuries ago, and we see this over and over again. Take a step back, put all of this in context, and recognize what's valuable for your business. How about that first before getting on the bandwagon that everybody else is on?
What I also like about that, Paul, is that you say in your book that the habit of approximating then translates into intuition. So I want to bring that back home for our listeners and viewers, that what we've been talking about is in the camp of intuition. It's important, I think, that they understand that. So there's just so much that you did with your development of intuition that I think gives access to your readers in a whole fresh way around intuition, and certainly me as well. So let's go on to the third pillar, because I want to make sure that we hit that as well before we go into the other stuff in the last segment. But the third pillar is synthesis. Who will take that?
Yeah, so we talk about summary versus synthesis. And summary is the data. Synthesis is the data plus judgment. Mm-hmm. And there are a couple of reasons why people, kind of steer away from synthesis. First of all, that word judgment means you are adding your personal perspective onto the data. It is not, a hard number. You're not taking it down to, 2 or 3 decimal places. That synthesis, you are interpreting something. But that is where the true value comes. If you want to make a decision, having synthesis, adding that perspective, and when we talk about perspective or judgment, if decisions were, there's a saying that, decisions are data is black and white, but decisions are gray. And because, there's risk, there's so many intangibles that you need to consider to really make an effective decision. And that synthesis is where your true value add becomes. And there's a couple ways we talk about doing that. So again, we want to create that safe space to open up the dialogue. And when we talk about synthesis, we come back to talking about outliers. When you look at data and there's certain points at the spectrum that you don't understand, one of the things you should ask yourself is, and interrogate those points, what surprised you on those points? That'll help you get perspective. Why is that range so great? I think the other thing that we talk about synthesis is in a very practical term. We talk about what, so what, and now what.
Yeah.
What is basically the data? How many times, will you look at a headline, or next time you look at a headline, and if it just says the what, and the what basically states what's on the page. As you see, we sold 5% more snow shovels in Rome in December of 2012. That's the what. So what is where you're adding that perspective. We sold 5% of snow shovels, but there was a freak snowstorm and we were still behind our competitors. Now you're starting to get into synthesis And then the last leg of the stool, when we talk about synthesis, is the now what? To Paul's point, should we change our distribution strategy? Why did we sell less? Not that we should all of a sudden go in and sell more snow shovels in Rome, but was it a supply issue? Were we not in the right location? So what, now what will start to get you on that path to synthesis.
Mm-hmm. Beautifully illustrated. Anything you wanted to add, Paul?
Well, I think there's in that now what, it's very much around the context that you're trying to understand for the business. People are very concerned about putting their own opinion out. And if we just got people past that, we hire brilliant young minds, and then we ask them to do routine work and not bring their opinion forward. Well, that's kind of wasteful and a tragedy. So
very demotivating too.
Very demotivating, exactly. And so if we said to those folks, you have an ability to interrogate this, you have a different point of view, and nowadays we try and cast a very wide net with our talent pools. What is it that you're observing? Mm-hmm. You're synthesizing this in the moment, just like everybody else. Can we create that safe space where people actually share their opinion, share the synthesis that they see, so this turns into a dialogue and not a monologue?
Right. Much more fun. Much more fun. And on that note, let's grab our last break here. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. Moving on here with Paul Magnoni and Christopher Frank. They are the co-authors of Decisions Over Decimals, Striking the Balance Between Intuition and Information. We've been talking about their second pillar of contextual analysis and their third one, synthesis in quantitative intuition. After the break, we're going to go into how we can use this stuff into our teams and the world at large. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. One other bit of news I want to share with you is the anthology that I curated called Passionately Striving and Why is available. I'm actually more proud of this book than I am my first book in many ways. I found 25 women from around the world to share their very intimate stories of how they discovered their purpose and are now serving from it. So we have anywhere from Australia to Zambia in the book. I hope you'll check that out. It's meant to be inspirational and educational, so come with us. If you're now just joining us, my guests are the co-authors of Decisions Over Decimals, Striking the Balance Between Intuition and Information. We have Paul Magnoni, Head of Global Strategic Alliances at Google, where he's developing a growing ecosystem of partners that will unlock the next generation of business value via the cloud and related technologies. We also have Christopher Frank, a seasoned market research leader at American Express, where he is focused on transforming the speed, relevancy, and impact of insights to influence marketing strategy. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. So for this last segment here, I wanted to get just a little bit into the last bit of synthesis, which is, of course, a decision. Then I want to talk about how we can actually really use this stuff in organizations. So I love that you have a whole chapter devoted to the decision moment. The moment has arrived. We've taken all this information. We've applied our intuition. And we've been creative about it. Now it's the moment. And so I want to get us, if you would, one of you talk about the decision moment.
Yes, this is my favorite topic because there's all that buildup, like you just said. And then when someone's supposed to say something, you can almost see them look over their shoulder to see what the boss said.
Right.
Or try to remember what the boss said at the beginning of the meeting. Because the answer is what the boss already anchored you on at the beginning, isn't it? Because you don't want to take a risk.
There's a great saying, what my boss finds interesting, I find fascinating.
Yes, yes, indeed.
So a decision moment itself, we've studied this, and we believe, there are many models. Pick the one that you like. But this particular model says that a decision can be sorted out if you look at time, risk, and trust. How much time do you have? There's no time whatsoever, or there's a significant amount of time. No time whatsoever and low risk. Do you want a sandwich? No, get the salad. There's no time to make the choice, but there's no risk. There's high risk and an enormous amount of time. Well, suddenly you're parliament, right? And committees are forming, and either one of those situations is not ideal. But when you look at in an operating room with a military unit, a football team, there's precision, there is coordination, and you're looking what happens in that moment. We can learn from those scenarios what happens in that moment where there's no time, you have to move quickly, and you have to move quickly. And the third pillar is you have trust. You trust each other. You know exactly what the person to your left and right is doing. And would it be beautiful if it worked that way in a boardroom or in a regular meeting room? And it doesn't, because in a business context, we mostly do not have the norms that allow us to operate efficiently together to make decisions. Everybody's sort of freestyling, which is wonderful in its creativity, but is wasteful often. So this model says time, risk, and trust. Get oriented around that and understand, based on everything we said in the first two segments, what brings you to that moment, and then what is the criteria to push through that moment.
So taking that a little further, then, one of the things I also appreciated is you said that success in driving a decision can be improved with focus on the stakeholder audience and focus on essential problems to be solved. And then you offered 5 areas, including obviously having a compelling story. I thought the way that you situated that in that book was really, really compelling. Can you share those areas about how to drive those decisions effectively?
Yeah. So, so you're talking about the building the team. Is that the structuring the team? I just want to make sure I'm referring.
Well, you have what I was hanging on to was being able to know your audience, obviously, what problem it is that you're trying to solve, having that compelling story to be able to get them to want to come with you. That was really what I wanted to hear more about for our listeners and viewers.
And creating the case, Chris.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So yeah, we call that chasing the decision. So you have the decision moment, and then we have what we call chasing the decision. Because I think a lot of times we all feel like we're kind of on that flywheel of trying to get to the decision. And so there's a whole chapter dedicated to how do you stop chasing the decision and actually get to that decision moment that we were just speaking about. So there's a couple of steps to that. First of all, be very clear on what you're solving, and make sure that there is, you may be clear. Make sure that there is acceptance, or collective acceptance on what you're solving. It's what we call framing the problem, and not only framing the problem, but frame the solution. What does success look like? There's something we called about, what are the victory conditions? Because we may have the same problem, we may wind up in 2 different places. So I think, having that discussion up front is number one. The other thing is we talk about is, truly knowing your audience. Not only, for longer term and what they think, but, even in the moment, are they dealing with, what are their pressures, whether resource pressures, money pressures, other decisions, or are they just distracted? I mean, literally, you go into a meeting, you're trying to get to that a decision moment, and they're not, with you. So understanding your audience is key. There's a couple different personalities that we talk about. What that's in the room you should be aware of. There's some fun names. For example, we talk about the Seymours. There's always someone that wants to see more data. Can you see more analysis? Can I see more spreadsheets? Watch out for the Seymours, because they will take you off your path to get to that decision. And we talk about various techniques on how to deal with the Seymours. Another person we talk about is Billy Numbers, and how they just love to dive into the numbers and the precision. So I think being aware of your audience, being aware of the problem, being very clear on what solution and success looks like. And then the final thing we talk about is, don't try and break your decision up into what we call micro decisions, because we all know that the shortest distance, between 2 points is a straight line. But we talk about this analogy, if anyone has gone on a sailboat, you never go straight. You tack, you do minor corrections all along the way. You will eventually get, precisely to where you want to go, and you make course corrections along the way. And one of the challenges we have seen with decision making is people try to go from point A to point B. And we actually talk about this model of tacking when you think about decision making. What's the smallest decision we can make today or by the end of this week, versus are we solving the big problem that we have to solve by the end of the quarter?
Excellent. I think that's just very accessible for our listeners and viewers as well, to really set it up, because it breaks down this enormous thing, the decision. Okay, so now I really have to bring this next, because, as somebody who loves to build culture in teams, I really like the idea of creating a QI culture and a team. And so I really appreciate that you talk about in your book, you say the current gap in the workforce is less about people with deep analytical skills. We have lots of machines to do that in AI, and more about leaders who can lead them and make better decisions with analytics. And then you go on to say, in hiring individuals, look for the QI skills along the three pillars: the precision questioning, contextualizing data, and synthesizing. So I want you, if you would, talk a little bit more about that. And then I want to also hear about, what you recommend in interviews. I thought that was really interesting.
So I'll take the first part. Paul can take the second part of the question. So when we talk about building a QI culture, I'll go back to a couple of things I said earlier. One, strive to create a learning environment.
Yes.
And you create that learning environment by really encouraging questions and encouraging dialogue, and open-ended questions. So, create that learning environment, create the space where people say, there's a data point, there's some information I don't understand, and then let's collectively have a dialogue around that. We actually talk about 4 specific roles in the book when we talk about this QI culture. We talk about data scientists. We talk about the data engineer. We talk about the data translator. And we talk about the data storyteller.
Artist, data artist.
Data artist. People various times talk about data visualization, data artist, data storytelling. Whatever term you use. So those are 4 core roles to a QI team. And what is interesting is, while we have so much information and data today, the smallest number of roles or people you need in those roles is the data scientist. Mm-hmm. And we have a conceptual diagram in the book. The largest number of people you need are data translators. And these, so data scientists by design, they're really into the tools, the techniques, the modelings, the data. Smallest number of those. The data engineers basically put the plumbing and the pipes in place to make sure that information is seamlessly flowing and it's connected. Critical. How many times, that person has information and that person has information, 2 different databases, spreadsheets, they never connect. Data engineers are important. The data translator They are the connector role. They connect the business needs and they literally translate the business needs and those challenges and that problem and that priority to the data scientists and the data engineers. It is an essential role. So they have a very unique and powerful skill in this QI culture to both understand business, but also to play that translator role. And then finally, we are very visual people. As individuals, we respond to pictures. We know that we respond to movies. We respond to sound. Um, and the data artist is essential. It's not just what we call arts and crafts. How do you take that content? How do you take your information and then depict it in a way that is engaging? That will advance you as much towards a decision as will having that level of precision in a model.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Paul?
Well, and it's really interesting, for your listeners, the easy way to remember this is anyone who's ever built a house or remodeled a house. How many architects do you have? You have one architect. How many engineers do you have? Well, it depends, right? You may have unique conditions with the property, the soil, whatever. So you might need a couple of different engineers. And then the translators, making sure that all the business needs are met, because somebody in the house is a gardener, somebody else needs a design studio and so forth. So somebody wants a big kitchen. You need to map that out appropriately. And the visualization, the data artist. I want Windsor valances. Well, I don't want Windsor valances, but maybe somebody in the house wants Windsor valances, and somebody else wants the room to look a particular way. The metaphor carries forward, and this is because this is how decisions inherently are made. It's layers. If that makes sense. Building a foundation up.
I hate to give you guys up, but we're almost out of time. I want to finish this show here with what I consider to be just a very alluring futuristic promise. And so I'm going to read from your book. You say the progression from automation to predictions and digital twin systems to the adoption of probabilistic thinking and AI lead to a final question. What do we as humans do with the extra capacity we will all have as these and many other newer methods and technologies proliferate? Optimistically, we can plan for additional time to focus on what matters once the mundane is expected and managed. We could actually focus on creativity. Ironically, as we automate more and apply ever complex technology, we may find time to discuss what matters more at a human level. That sounds great to me.
Yeah, and we have historical precedent for that. There are superhuman abilities everywhere. There's superhuman speed. It's called your car. There's superhuman strength. It's called a bulldozer. Imagine, think about the amount of time that you save because you get in a car instead of having to walk. And so how do you apply that time differently? It's the same situation. You can use systems, and there are emerging systems right now that allow you and will allow you to do interesting things that have up until this point consumed an absurd amount of time. And so you can spend the time on tuning rather than building from scratch. In January of 2023, everybody's obsessed with large language models and all these chat systems that are out there. Are they good or are they bad? That's not the question. It's how do you want to use it? Do you want to take that and instead of starting from scratch, take what these systems generate and give you some raw material to then tune rather than starting from scratch? That's one way to think about it. Ultimately, we spend so much time doing the mundane, as I said before, rather than focusing on the insightful dimensions that humans can bring. So let's take advantage of these systems that free up time for us.
Sounds great to me. And we are out of time. Gentlemen, that was a fantastic way to finish. I really likened that what you said in the last part of the book here is, when we moved from literally foraging for food every day, we learned how to store it. So that gave us that extra energy. To me, that's what your book is putting forth, but now in the current state. So fantastic way to really situate the promise of tomorrow using what you taught us in your book. Paul, Christopher, thank you so much for being on Working on Purpose. I loved your book and I'm happy to share it with the world.
Thank you very much. This was terrific.
Listeners, viewers, if you want to learn more about these two fine gentlemen, Paul Magnoni and Christopher Frank, their book, Decisions Over Decimals, or the work that they are doing together, start by visiting their website. It's dodthebook.com. So imagine Decisions Over Decimals, the book, dodthebook.com. Last week, if you missed the live show, you can always catch a re-recorded podcast. We were on the air with Dr. Soren Kaplan talking about his fascinating new book, Experiential Intelligence, Harness the Power of Experience for Personal and Business Breakthroughs. Really amazing, accessible stuff for yourself and your team to really figure out how to distinguish your own contribution. Next week, we'll be on the air with Dr. Dante Vaughn talking about the book he co-authored, From Culture to Culture, the system to define, implement, measure, and improve your company culture. See you there. Remember that work is an important part of our lives and can be one of the best adventures and means of realizing our potential and making the impact we so crave. So let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.